My father-in-law, Bill Harrington, looked at me across the mahogany dinner table with a smirk that could cut glass. He slid a single sheet of paper toward me past the crystal wine glasses and the untouched lobster. It was not a partnership offer. It was an employment contract for a janitor position at his logistics company. $35,000 a year to scrub toilets in the building I secretly owned 45% of. I looked at my wife, Natalie, waiting for her to defend me, to tell her father that I deserved respect. Instead, she squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Take it, Jack, please do not embarrass me." In that moment, my heart turned to ice. They saw a poor factory worker desperate for a crumb from their table. They did not know they were sitting across from the majority shareholder of Apex Capital. They did not know I could buy and sell their entire legacy before dessert was served. I picked up the pen, signed the contract, and smiled, because I knew that tomorrow I would not be cleaning their floors. I would be cleaning house. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to hide your true power from people who underestimated you. The faucet in our kitchen sink had a rhythmic drip that echoed through the small apartment like a ticking bomb. Drip, drip, drip. It was a sound I had grown used to over the last 3 years living in this rundown complex on the outskirts of Detroit. The walls were paper thin, allowing us to hear every argument from the neighbors, and the smell of stale cooking oil never quite left the hallway. I was sitting at the chipped laminate table reading a book on forensic accounting when the front door flew open. Natalie stormed in, bringing a gust of cold Michigan air and the heavy scent of expensive perfume with her. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my shift at the assembly plant went. She simply threw her designer handbag onto the sofa and tossed a thick, cream-colored envelope onto the table in front of me. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the surface until it hit my coffee mug. "You need to find a suit," she said, her voice sharp and devoid of warmth. "A real suit, Jack, not that cheap polyester thing you wore to my cousin's wedding." I opened the envelope. The gold-embossed lettering shimmered under the harsh fluorescent kitchen light. It was an invitation to William Harrington's 60th birthday gala, the event of the season for Detroit logistics elite. I looked up at Natalie. Her face was flushed not from the cold, but from stress. She was pacing the small living room, her heels clicking loudly on the worn linoleum floor. Since her father Bill had promoted her to a junior executive position 6 months ago, she had changed. The sweet woman who used to love our pizza nights on the floor had been replaced by someone constantly checking her reflection in the mirror, terrified of not fitting in with the country club crowd. "We cannot afford a new suit right now, Nat," I said quietly, keeping my voice even. "The rent is due next week, and the car needs a new alternator." It was a test. It was always a test. I had black cards tucked away in a safety deposit box that could buy every suit in Tom Ford's collection, but I needed to know if she loved Jack the husband or Jack the provider. Natalie stopped pacing and looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration that stung more than anger. "That is exactly why we have to go," she snapped. "Bradley is going to be there. He just closed a massive deal with the Chinese suppliers. Daddy says Bradley is the future of the company." Bradley Thorne. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. Her ex-boyfriend. The man who had everything I supposedly did not. Money, pedigree, and a lack of morals that allowed him to climb the corporate ladder by stepping on everyone else. "If your father likes him so much, maybe he should adopt him," I said, returning my gaze to the invitation. Natalie sighed, a long, exasperated sound that signaled she was losing patience with my mediocrity. "Do not start, Jack. This is important for my career. I need you to just look presentable. Do not talk about the factory. Do not talk about your union meetings. Just stand there, drink the champagne, and try not to look like you fix machines for a living." She walked past me into the bedroom, slamming the door shut. I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the faucet drip again. she was ashamed of me. The realization was not new, but tonight it felt heavy like a lead weight in my chest. She saw the grease under my fingernails and the worn-out boots by the door and saw failure. She did not see the man who had quietly built a billion-dollar investment fund from the ground up using shell companies to acquire nearly half of her father's business empire. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the gray parking lot. I would go to this party. I would wear my cheap suit, and I would watch them. I would watch how they treated the man they thought was nothing. Because the higher they held their noses, the easier it would be to pull the rug out from under them. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving the room in darkness, waiting for the storm that I knew was coming. The engine of my 10-year-old sedan sputtered and coughed as we turned onto the pristine asphalt of the private drive leading to the Harrington estate. The sound was jarring like a dying animal in a cathedral of silence. Natalie sat in the passenger seat, rigidly staring straight ahead, her knuckles white as she clutched her purse. She had spent the entire 40-minute drive criticizing my tie, my hair, and the faint squeak of the brakes. We approached the massive iron gates guarded by a security booth that looked nicer than our entire apartment building. A uniformed guard stepped out, his hand raised in a sharp halt motion. I rolled down the window manually, cranking the handle which seemed to take an eternity. "Deliveries are at the service entrance around the back," the guard said without even looking at my face. He just saw the rusted wheel wells and the faded paint, and made an assumption. Natalie let out a small, mortified gasp that sounded like a balloon losing air. "We are guests," she hissed, leaning across me, her voice tight with panic. "I am Natalie Harrington, Bill Harrington's daughter." The guard peered in, skeptical. He checked his clipboard slowly, deliberately, making us wait, while my engine idled, roughly vibrating the entire chassis. It was a power play, a reminder of our place in this world, or at least the place they thought we occupied. Then came the roar. A sleek silver Porsche 911 tore up the driveway behind us, its LED headlights cutting through the twilight like lasers. The guard's demeanor changed instantly. He straightened up, smiled, and waved the Porsche through the other lane without even checking a list. The Porsche slowed down next to us. The window slid down electronically, revealing the leather interior and the man who currently held the title of Director of Sales at Harrington Logistics. Bradley Thorne sat there looking like a magazine cover model, his teeth blindingly white. "Car trouble, Jack?" he asked, his voice dripping with faux concern that made my skin crawl. "You should have told me. I could have sent a town car for Nat. I hate to see her riding in that." He gestured vaguely at my car, as if it were a disease. Natalie did not defend me. She did not defend our car, which had taken us on our honeymoon road trip 3 years ago. She just offered a weak, apologetic smile to her ex-boyfriend. "Hi, Bradley. We are fine. Just a misunderstanding at the gate." I gripped the steering wheel so hard, the old leather cracked under my fingers. Bradley Thorne. The man who was cooking the books at the company I secretly owned almost half of. The man who treated the federal securities regulations like mere suggestions. He looked at me with the pity one reserves for a stray dog. I looked back at him and saw a walking liability. "Go on ahead," the guard finally muttered, opening our gate reluctantly, as if letting my car in would contaminate the estate air. I pressed the gas. The car lurched forward, following the taillights of Bradley's Porsche. He sped up, leaving us in a cloud of exhaust fumes. Natalie finally exhaled, but it was a sound of relief that Bradley was there, not that we had arrived safely. "Please, Jack," she whispered, fixing her hair in the visor mirror, refusing to meet my eyes. "Try not to stand next to Bradley tonight. The comparison is just too much." She was right. The comparison was too much. But she was comparing the wrong things. She saw a Porsche and a rust bucket. I saw a fraud and a billionaire. I parked the car in the shadows far away from the valet stand, where the Bentleys and Mercedes were lined up. I walked toward the front door, the gravel crunching under my cheap shoes, my mind sharpening like a blade. They wanted to judge me by my cover. Tonight I would let them read the book. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing a foyer that cost more than my grandmother's entire house. The air inside was cool and smelled of expensive lilies and old money. I stepped onto the marble floor, feeling the immediate uncomfortable squeak of my rubber soles. Bill Harrington stood in the center of the room under a crystal chandelier that cast a prism of light across his bald head. He held a Scotch glass like a scepter. Beside him, Catherine, his wife, looked like a porcelain doll that had been kept on a shelf too long, brittle and cold. Natalie let go of my arm the moment we crossed the threshold. It was a subtle movement, a physical distancing that spoke volumes. She rushed forward, her face transforming into a mask of bright, eager devotion. "Daddy, Mom," she chirped, kissing them on the cheeks. Bill hugged her, but his eyes were already scanning the room, looking for someone more important. His gaze landed on me for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition, no warmth. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture that has been placed in the wrong room. He did not extend a hand. He did not say hello. He simply looked away, his eyes sliding past me to the man entering behind us. Bradley Thorne walked in, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was as if the sun had come out. Bill pushed past his own daughter to clap Bradley on the shoulder, a beaming smile breaking across his face. "There he is, the man of the hour," Bill boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Catherine stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch the lapel of Bradley's jacket. "Oh, Bradley," she cooed, touching the fabric with reverence. "Is this a Zegna? The stitching is exquisite. It fits you perfectly, just like a glove." I stood 3 feet away, smoothing the front of my off-the-rack polyester suit that Natalie had despised earlier. The contrast was humiliatingly sharp. They were praising him for existing, while punishing me for breathing their air. I waited for Natalie to introduce me, to bring me into the circle, to say, "This is my husband, Jack." Instead, she laughed, a nervous, tinkling sound that blended in with her parents' adoration. She looked at Bradley with a mixture of envy and admiration, her eyes shining in a way they never did when she looked at me. Then came the moment that severed the last thread of my patience. Bradley cleared his throat slightly, adjusting his silk tie. "It is a bit dry in here," he mentioned casually, a comment thrown into the void. Before a waiter could move, before I could even blink, Natalie stepped forward. "Let me get you a drink, Brad," she offered quickly, her voice eager to please. "Scotch on the rocks, right? Just how you like it." She did not look at me. She did not ask if I wanted anything. My wife, the woman I shared a bed and a life with, turned her back on her husband to serve a drink to her ex-boyfriend because it made her father smile. She walked toward the bar, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the foyer, isolated in a room full of people. Bill put his arm around Bradley's shoulders, guiding him toward the main salon. "Come, Bradley, let us talk about the China acquisition," Bill said, leaving me standing in their wake like a ghost. I watched them go, my hands clenched in my pockets, fingering the lint in the seams. They thought I was invisible. They thought I did not matter. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lilies and money, and followed them. If they wanted to treat me like a spectator, I would watch, and I would remember every single detail. The dining room was a theater of excess designed to make everyone feel small in the presence of Bill Harrington's ego. 20 guests sat around a table long enough to land a plane, covered in white linen that cost more than my monthly rent. I was seated at the far end, near the swinging kitchen doors, a spot usually reserved for children or unwanted relatives. From this vantage point, I watched my wife Natalie sitting between her mother and Bradley, laughing at jokes I could not hear. She looked radiant and completely stranger to me. Waiters moved like shadows, pouring vintage wine and serving plates of filet mignon that were cooked to perfection. Bill stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass. The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. He adjusted his silk tie and surveyed his guests with the look of a king, addressing his subjects. "I want to propose a toast," he announced, his voice booming, "to Harrington Logistics. As of this afternoon, our valuation has officially crossed the $1.5 billion mark." Applause erupted around the table. Polite, enthusiastic clapping from people who smelled money and wanted to be close to it. Bill held up a hand, basking in the adoration. "They said we were going under 5 years ago," he continued, his eyes misting over with self-importance. "They said the market was dead. But I had a vision. I steered this ship through the storm. And that is why Apex Capital, that mysterious investment fund from New York, decided to back us. They saw my leadership. They saw my grit." I took a slow sip of water to hide the smirk threatening to break across my face. His leadership had nearly bankrupted the company. His grit consisted of firing 300 workers to save his bonus. Apex Capital backed him because I authorized the purchase order from my laptop in our cramped kitchen while eating leftover pasta. I saved his empire because I foolishly thought that if he succeeded, he would finally respect the man his daughter married. I was the silent partner he bragged about, and he did not even know my name. Then the spotlight shifted. Bill lowered his glass, his eyes scanning the table until they landed on me. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, predatory amusement. "Speaking of grit," he said loud enough for the waiters to pause, "we have a real blue-collar hero among us tonight. Jack, how is the factory? Still putting screw A into slot B?" The guests turned to look at me, their faces masks of polite confusion and pity. The silence stretched thin and painful. "The factory is fine, Bill," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the heat rising in my neck. "We are actually implementing new robotics protocols next week." Bill let out a short, barking laugh. "Robotics protocols," he mocked, turning to Bradley. "Listen to him. He makes it sound like he is building rockets. He stands on a line for 8 hours a day, making sure the boxes do not fall off. Tell me, Jack, do you ever get tired of the noise? Or does the sound of machinery just drown out the ambition?" A few guests chuckled nervously, taking their cue from the host. Natalie stared at her plate, her face burning red. She did not look at me. She did not say a word. She just let her father use her husband as the evening entertainment. Bill leaned forward, his expression mockingly serious. "Just do us a favor, son. Make sure you scrub the grease from under your fingernails before you touch those bread rolls. We would not want to contaminate the food with manual labor." The laughter was louder this time. Bradley smirked, sipping his wine. I looked down at my hands. They were clean, cleaner than Bill's conscience. I gripped the linen napkin in my lap, my knuckles turning white. He thought he was shaming a factory worker. He had no idea he was insulting the man who held the mortgage on his ego. I swallowed the rage, tasting bile, and forced myself to look him in the eye. "Hygiene is a priority, Bill," I said, my voice flat. "Just like overhead costs." He ignored my comment, dismissing me with a wave of his hand as he turned back to Bradley to discuss real business. I sat there in the noise of their celebration, feeling the cold, hard resolve settling in my gut like a stone. "Enjoy the laugh, Bill," I thought. "It will be your last." The laughter from Bill's joke about my hygiene had barely subsided when he cleared his throat, signaling the main event. He reached down beside his chair and produced a blue presentation folder, the kind usually reserved for million-dollar contracts. He slid it across the pristine white tablecloth. It spun slowly, coming to a rest directly in front of my empty bread plate, knocking over a silver salt shaker. The spilled salt looked like diamonds on the fabric, a bad omen that no one else seemed to notice. "Open it." "Jack!" Bill commanded, his voice dropping to a tone of benevolent charity that made my stomach turn. "Consider it a birthday gift. Not for me, but for you. Because I cannot sit by and watch my daughter live in squalor while her husband plays mechanic." I opened the folder. The paper inside was thick, high-quality bond. At the top, centered in bold Arial font, were the words, "Employment Agreement." I scanned the document, my eyes catching the key details that Bill had undoubtedly highlighted in his mind. Job title, Custodial Maintenance Staff Level 1. Annual salary, $35,000. Bill leaned back in his chair, interlacing his fingers over his stomach. "I heard rumors about layoffs at your assembly plant, Jack. I will not have Natalie worrying about making rent. So I created a position for you at headquarters. It is stable work. Honest work." He paused for effect, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "You will be assigned to the executive wing. That means you are responsible for the deep cleaning of the boardroom, the private restrooms, and the executive suites. Specifically, you will ensure that Bradley's office is immaculate every single morning before he arrives at 8. The air left the room. I looked up. Bill was smiling a cruel, satisfied grin. He was not offering me a job. He was offering me a leash. He wanted the man who married his daughter to scrub the toilet of the man he wished she had married. Bradley let out a low chuckle, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He looked at me with the predatory amusement of a cat playing with a half-dead mouse. "Do not look so grim," Jack Bradley drawled, his voice smooth like oil. "It is a vital role. I need a clean environment to close billion-dollar deals, and I promise I will try to aim for the center of the trash can. But you know how it is. Sometimes when you are busy making history, things get a little messy." A few guests gasped softly, but most just watched, fascinated by the spectacle. Bill pointed a manicured finger at the paper. "It is $5,000 more than you make now, son. Full benefits, dental included. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line, pick up a mop, and know your place." I looked down at the contract again. Clause 4 stated that I would report directly to the office manager, who reported to Bradley. I would be 2 rungs below the receptionist. My hand rested on the table next to the pen Bill had conveniently placed there. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from shame, but from the sheer audacity of it. He was offering me $35,000 to clean a building that I could turn into a parking lot with a single phone call. I looked at the salary figure again. It was insulting. It was pathetic. It was perfect. It was the exact amount of rope they needed to hang themselves. I slowly reached for the pen. My hand froze inches above the signature line. The heavy Mont Blanc pen felt foreign in my calloused fingers. The silence in the dining room was absolute, a vacuum, waiting to be filled. I slowly turned my head toward Natalie. This was it. The precipice. I was not looking for permission to sign. I was looking for my wife. I was giving her one final chance to stand up, to say that her husband was not a charity case, to say that I deserved better than scrubbing the latrines of her high school sweetheart. Natalie did not look at me. Her gaze was fixed on the diamond tennis bracelet adorning her wrist, twisting it nervously. She could feel the weight of the room, the expectation of her father, the amusement of Bradley, and the judgment of 20 of Detroit's wealthiest socialites. She took a sip of wine, her hand trembling slightly. "Natalie," I said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "Do you want me to do this?" She finally looked up, but her eyes were hard, glassy with the desperation to belong to this world that despised me. She looked at her father, who was tapping his watch impatiently. Then she looked at Bradley, who offered her a sympathetic, encouraging nod. She took a deep breath and delivered the blow that shattered whatever remained of our marriage. "Just take it, Jack," she said, her voice clear and ringing through the silent room. "Stop being so stubborn. It is a job, a real job. Daddy is trying to help us. Do not let your fragile ego get in the way of our future. We cannot keep living like we do. Please, just for once, do something useful." The words hung in the air like smoke. Fragile ego. Useful. She had not just failed to defend me. She had handed them the knife to cut my throat. She had publicly validated their disrespect, confirming that she too saw me as a burden, a fixer-upper project that had failed. Bradley chuckled softly, shaking his head as if embarrassed on her behalf. I looked at her for a long moment, memorizing the contour of her face the way her lips pursed in annoyance. I realized then that the Natalie I loved, the woman who sat on the floor of our empty apartment eating pizza and dreaming of the future, was gone. She had been consumed by the Harrington ambition. I turned back to the contract. The anger in my gut vanished, replaced by a glacial calm. It was a clarity I had not felt in years. They wanted a janitor. I would give them a janitor. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly, dark and permanent. I signed my name with a flourish, Jack Dawson. Excellent, Bill boomed, clapping his hands together as I capped the pen. He snatched the paper away, as if afraid I might realize my mistake. Welcome to the team, Jack. Do not be late tomorrow. The toilets on the executive floor do not clean themselves. The table erupted in polite applause. Natalie let out a sigh of relief, finally smiling at me, a genuine smile of gratitude for my submission. She touched my arm, whispering thank you for being reasonable. I pulled my arm away gently, picking up my wine glass. I looked at the dark red liquid, swirling it just as Bradley had done. I raised the glass toward Bill, then toward Bradley, and finally toward my wife. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had won. I took a slow, deliberate sip, masking the predator awakening inside me. You are welcome, I thought. Let the games begin. The polyester uniform was stiff against my skin, a harsh shade of cobalt blue that screamed servitude. It smelled of industrial bleach and someone else's sweat. I stood in front of the cracked mirror in the basement locker room, adjusting the name tag that Bill had personally ordered. It read Jack, just Jack. No last name, no title, just a single syllable designed to strip away my identity. I pulled on the heavy rubber gloves, feeling the damp cold inside them. This was my armor. To the world, I was now the lowest rung on the ladder. But to me, I was a spy behind enemy lines. I picked up the mop bucket, the wheels squeaking on the concrete floor, and headed for the elevator. Not the main glass elevators that whisked executives to the sky, but the scarred freight elevator that smelled of trash and despair. I emerged into the main lobby just as the morning rush began. The atrium was a cathedral of glass and steel, echoing with the click of expensive heels and the hum of ambition. I lowered my head and dipped the mop into the gray water. The first few minutes were a study in invisibility. People walked past me as if I were part of the architecture, stepping around the wet floor sign without breaking their stride. But then the whispers started. I saw a group of junior analysts standing near the reception desk. I recognized one of them. Mark. He had been at our wedding, sitting on the groom's side, drinking my beer. He nudged his colleague and pointed. Is that Natalie Harrington's husband? The guy from the factory? I heard him whisper, his voice carrying over the polished marble. I kept mopping my rhythm steady. Yes, that is him, the other guy replied, laughing. I heard Bill hired him out of pity. Imagine falling that low, scrubbing the floors of your wife's company. Their laughter was a sharp blade, but I let it slide off me. I was not scrubbing floors. I was auditing. As I moved the mop, I observed everything. The wasted electricity, the redundant security staff, the overpriced floral arrangements delivered daily. This company was bleeding money, and nobody noticed because they were too busy looking down at me. Then the revolving doors spun, and William Harrington walked in. He was flanked by two assistants who were scrambling to keep up with his stride. He looked like a man who owned the world. He stopped when he saw me. A cruel smile spread across his face. He walked over, his Italian leather shoes clicking on the tiles I had just cleaned. He stood right in front of me, invading my space. Morning, Jack, he said loudly, ensuring the entire lobby could hear. You missed a spot. Before I could react, he pulled his leg back and kicked my mop bucket. It was not a stumble. It was a deliberate, vicious kick. The bucket tipped over, sending a wave of dirty gray water splashing across the pristine floor and soaking my pant legs. The lobby went silent. Bill chuckled a dry, heartless sound. "Whoops. Clumsy me. Clean that up, soldier, and make it shine." He stepped over the puddle and walked toward the elevators, leaving a trail of muddy footprints for me to erase. I stood there, water dripping into my shoes, my hands gripping the mop handle until the wood creaked. The humiliation burned in my chest, hotter than any fire. But as I watched the elevator doors close on his smug face, I felt a surge of cold power. "Kick the bucket all you want, Bill," I thought. "You just kicked the man who owns the ground you stand on." I righted the bucket and squeezed out the mop. Every stain I cleaned today was just practice for the stain I would remove from this company tomorrow. Him. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending to a different planet. The air here was thinner, recycled through filters that probably cost more than my car. I pushed my cart toward the double glass doors of the director of sales office. Bradley Thorne was sitting behind a desk made of reclaimed teak wood, his feet propped up on the polished surface. He was on a call, laughing that hollow corporate laugh that signaled he was talking to someone he needed something from. He saw me enter and did not even blink. To him, I was furniture, a fixture, something to be used and ignored. He waited until I was right in front of the desk. Then, with the casual indifference of a child tired of a toy, he nudged his ceramic mug. It tipped over. Dark roast coffee cascaded over the edge, splashing onto the cream-colored Persian rug and splattering onto his expensive Italian loafers. He did not jump. He did not curse. He just looked at me. "Oops," he mouthed silently, winking at me. He pointed a finger at the stain, then at me, then at the floor. He did not need to speak. The command was clear. Kneel, clean, obey. I dropped to my knees. The wetness soaked into the fabric of my cheap uniform, turning the cobalt blue almost black. As I sprayed the industrial cleaner, the chemical smell mixing with the aroma of roasted beans, Bradley spun his chair around, facing the panoramic window that overlooked the city I secretly owned a piece of. He resumed his conversation, his voice dropping an octave but still perfectly audible in the silent office. "Yeah, listen to me," he said into his headset. "The Vector Logistics contract is a go. We padded the shipping manifests just like we discussed. Nobody checks the tare weight on the containers coming out of the Newark hub. It is free money." My hand paused mid-scrub. Vector Logistics. I knew every legitimate vendor in our supply chain. I had audited the books myself before buying my 45% stake. Vector was not one of them. It was a shell company, a ghost. He was not just skimming. He was creating phantom shipments and billing the company for services that never existed. He was bleeding the beast dry right under Bill's nose. Bradley continued, oblivious to the wolf in his room. "Put the surplus into the Cayman account under Blue Horizon. Bill is too busy counting his press clippings to notice the inventory drift. We will have enough to buy that villa in Tuscany by Christmas. And if the auditors sniff around, we just blame it on supply chain volatility. It is foolproof." I lowered my head, scrubbing harder to hide the predatory glint in my eyes. Blue Horizon. Cayman Islands. He was giving me the routing numbers to his own funeral. He thought he was safe because he was talking in front of a janitor. In his arrogant worldview, a man who cleans toilets could not possibly understand complex embezzlement schemes or offshore laundering. He thought my brain was as empty as my bank account appeared to be. I finished cleaning the spot, leaving a faint damp circle on the rug. I stood up, picking up my bucket, the dirty water sloshing against the sides. Bradley finally hung up the phone and swiveled back around. He looked at the rug, then at me, his lip curling in disgust. "Good job, Jack," he said, dismissing me with a flick of his wrist. "You missed a spot near the chair leg, though. Hop to it, and try not to breathe so loud. It is distracting." I knelt back down without a word. I was not just cleaning a rug. I was collecting the nails for his coffin. Every word he said was burned into my brain. Vector Logistics, Newark, Blue Horizon. I had the roadmap to his destruction, and he had just handed it to me because he was too busy looking down to realize I was memorizing the view from the top. The closet smelled of lemon bleach and confined air. It was a space barely large enough for a mop bucket, let alone a man, but it was the only place in the building where the cameras did not reach. I locked the door and leaned against the metal shelving, pushing aside a stack of rough paper towels. My heart was beating with a steady rhythmic thud, not from fear, but from adrenaline. This was the pivot point, the moment the game changed from observation to execution. I reached into the lining of my uniform jacket. I had sewn a hidden pocket there specifically for this. I pulled out my phone, not the cracked Android I used in front of Natalie, but a secure satellite device that cost more than my first car. I dialed a number that was not saved in the contacts list. It rang once. Mr. Dawson. The voice on the other end was crisp, cold, and efficient. Elias Blackwood, my attorney, the only man in Detroit who knew that the guy scrubbing toilets at Harrington Logistics was actually the majority shareholder of Apex Capital. Blackwood. I said, my voice dropping the submissive tremble I used with Bill and Bradley, replacing it with the steel authority of a man who managed billion-dollar portfolios. We are moving the timeline up. Initiate the purchase protocol immediately. There was a pause on the line, the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. We are ahead of schedule, Jack. The market is volatile. If we move now, we risk exposure before the quarterly earnings report. I do not care about the earnings report, I snapped, staring at a jug of industrial solvent. I just left Bradley's office. He is embezzling funds through a shell company called Vector Logistics. He is gutting the inventory. If we wait, there will be nothing left to take over but a hollow shell and a lawsuit. I heard Blackwood stop typing. Embezzlement. That changes the risk profile. Do you want to alert the SEC? No, I said firmly. Not yet. If the feds freeze the assets, Bill will spin it. He will play the victim. I need to take the company first. Then I will hand them over to the authorities wrapped in a bow. Listen to me, Blackwood. We are currently sitting at 45% ownership, distributed through the 3 holding companies. Correct, Blackwood confirmed. You are the largest single minority shareholder, but Bill still controls the board through his voting bloc and the scattered retail shares. That ends today, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. I want you to sweep the floating shares, buy everything that is available on the open market. I need another 6%. I want to cross the 51% threshold before the closing bell today. 6%. Blackwood repeated, his tone shifting from advisor to broker. That is a hostile move, Jack. It will trigger a mandatory disclosure. The price will spike. You will be paying a premium of at least 20% over market value. It will cost you an extra $50 million. Do it, I commanded without hesitation. I do not care about the premium. Use the liquidity from the tech sell-off last week. Just get me that 6%. I want absolute controlling interest. I want to be able to walk into that boardroom and fire the entire executive suite without asking for permission. Understood, Blackwood said. I will route the purchases through the Singapore exchange to delay the immediate alerts, but Bill will get a notification from his broker within the hour that there is high-volume activity. He will know someone is coming for him. Let him know, I said, a cold smile touching my lips in the darkness of the closet. Let him panic. Let him think it is a Chinese conglomerate or a corporate raider. He will be looking out the window for barbarians at the gate. He will never suspect the barbarian is already inside the castle plunging his toilet. Execute the trade, Blackwood. Authorization code Delta 70. Make me the owner. Done. Good hunting, Mr. Dawson. I hung up and slipped the phone back into the hidden lining. I took a deep breath, exhaling the tension. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the bright fluorescent hallway, grabbing the handle of my mop cart. My shoulders slumped back into the posture of the defeated worker. My eyes lowered to the floor. Jack the billionaire was gone. Jack the janitor was back. But as I pushed the squeaky wheels toward the elevators, I felt lighter. I was no longer just an employee. I was the landlord. And eviction day was coming. The lunch hour at Harrington Logistics was a study in silence. The executives had retreated to their country clubs and high-end steakhouses, leaving the hallways deserted, save for the low hum of the HVAC system. I pushed my gray plastic cart down the corridor toward the server room. The sign on the door read, "Authorized personnel only," in stark red letters. To anyone else, it was a warning. To me, it was an invitation. I pulled out a key card I had swiped from the security desk earlier that morning when the guard was busy flirting with the receptionist. The reader beeped green and the heavy door clicked open. A blast of frigid air hit me, carrying the ozone smell of superheated electronics. The room was a fortress of blinking blue and green lights, rows of black towers humming with the data of a billion-dollar empire. I parked my cart against the door to keep it from locking and moved quickly to the main console. I did not need to hack the firewall. I owned the firewall. As the majority shareholder, I had backdoor administrative access that not even the IT director knew about. I typed in my override code, and the screen flickered to life. I was looking for this master financial directory, but what I found was something far more sinister. A hidden partition on the main drive labeled Project Silk Road. I opened it. My breath hitched in my throat. It was a due diligence report prepared for the Shenzhou Group, a massive Chinese conglomerate known for hostile takeovers and stripping American companies for parts. I scrolled through the documents, my eyes widening with every line. Bill was not just incompetent, he was a fraud. There were two sets of books. The first set, the one he showed the board, and the public showed steady growth and manageable debt. The second set, the real one, showed a company on the brink of collapse. Revenue was down 40%. The logistics chain was broken. To cover the losses, Bill had been fabricating invoices and inflating asset values to make the company look like a golden goose. He was cooking the books to inflate the valuation to $1.5 billion, just long enough to close the sale. The deal memo outlined the terms: a full cash buyout. The Shenzhou Group would acquire all assets and intellectual property. In exchange, Bill would receive a golden parachute worth $200 million and a seat on their advisory board. But Clause 17 was the knife in the back. Upon acquisition, Shenzhou would liquidate the Detroit headquarters and move all operations to Shenzhen. He was going to fire everyone: the 3,000 workers at the warehouse, the administrative staff, the people who had built his fortune. He was selling them all down the river so he could retire in luxury. And Natalie. I found an email draft addressed to her. It was a letter of recommendation for a junior position at a fashion house in New York. He was not even planning to take her with him. He was going to leave his own daughter in the wreckage of the company he destroyed. I inserted an encrypted USB drive into the terminal. The progress bar crawled across the screen, copying every damning spreadsheet, every fake invoice, every email between Bill and the Chinese buyers. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. He thought he was the smartest man in the room playing chess, while everyone else played checkers. He did not realize he was playing against the man who built the board. The download finished with a soft chime. I pulled the drive and slipped it into my pocket next to the cloth I used to wipe toilets. It was fitting. I was about to flush his entire legacy. I grabbed my mop just as the door handle turned. I was already scrubbing a scuff mark on the floor when the IT director walked in. He looked at me, looked at the mop, and sneered. "Keep it cold in here, Jack," he muttered, walking past me. I kept my head down. Oh, it is going to get very cold, I thought, freezing. The rhythmic whir of the floor buffer was the only sound in the executive corridor. a hypnotic drone that allowed me to disappear into the background. I was polishing the marble directly in front of the elevator bank, my blue uniform stained with the sweat of manual labor. The bell chimed a soft, digital tone that signaled an arrival. The silver doors slid open, and my wife stepped out. Natalie looked breathtaking. She was wearing a new cream-colored trench coat that I knew we could not afford, belted tightly at the waist, and her hair was styled in soft waves that bounced as she walked. For a fraction of a second, my heart leaped. I thought she had come to see me. I thought she had come to apologize, to bring me a sandwich, to tell me that she was proud of me for swallowing my pride to pay our bills. I straightened up, turning off the machine, wiping my hands on my pants, ready to greet her. Then I saw the bag. It was a distinctive, heavy paper bag from Giuliano's, the Italian deli 3 blocks away. The place that sold $20 paninis and imported sodas. The place Bradley Thorne bragged about visiting daily. The smell of truffle oil and prosciutto wafted through the sterile hallway, hitting me like a physical blow. She was not here for me. She was here for him. She walked briskly down the hall, her eyes scanning the room numbers. She was 10 feet away when she finally saw me. I watched the recognition hit her face. Her step faltered for just a microsecond. Her eyes widened slightly, and her hand tightened around the handle of the deli bag. I waited. I waited for a smile, a nod, a hello. I waited for my wife to acknowledge the existence of her husband. Instead, a mask slammed down over her features. Her expression went blank, smooth, and cold. She adjusted her gaze, looking not at my face, but at a point somewhere over my left shoulder. She kept walking. She was going to pretend I was not there. She was going to pretend the man scrubbing the floor 5 feet away from her did not share her bed and her last name. I stood directly in her path. I wanted to force the issue. I wanted to make her look at me. But as she got closer, she simply navigated around me, the way one navigates around a trash can or a wet floor sign. She pulled her coat tighter, as if afraid that the poverty of my uniform might be contagious. "Excuse me," she murmured softly, without making eye contact. It was the polite, dismissive tone one uses with strangers. It cut deeper than any insult Bill had thrown at me. She stopped at the double glass doors of the director of sales office. She knocked a playful, rhythmic rap on the glass. Through the blinds, I saw Bradley stand up and open the door. His face lit up when he saw her. "Nat," he exclaimed, his voice carrying into the hallway. "You actually brought it. You are a lifesaver." "I just happened to be in the neighborhood," she lied, her voice pitching up into that flirtatious register she used to use with me years ago. "I know how much you love the caprese special. I thought you might be hungry." "You are too good to me," Bradley said, leaning against the doorframe, blocking her view of the hallway, blocking her view of me. "Come in. I have some samples for the spring line I want to show you. Your dad says you have a great eye for this stuff." She walked in, giggling softly. The door clicked shut behind her. The blinds were still partially open. I watched as she set the food on his desk. She sat in the guest chair, crossing her legs, getting comfortable in the world I was excluded from. She was feeding my enemy while I cleaned up his mess. I turned the floor buffer back on. The loud mechanical roar drowned out the sound of their laughter, but it could not drown out the cold fury rising in my throat. She walked past her husband to feed her ex. "Message received, Natalie." Loud and clear. I pushed the machine forward, grinding the polish into the stone, erasing every scuff mark just as she had erased me. The executive washroom was a sanctuary of Italian marble and gold-plated fixtures, a place where the masters of the universe came to relieve themselves. I was on my knees, my head practically inside a porcelain bowl, scrubbing a rust stain that refused to yield. The heavy oak door swung open, and the room filled with the boisterous laughter of men who believed they were untouchable. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. The heavy tread of Bill Harrington's custom Oxfords and the lighter click of Bradley's loafers were distinct. I froze my hand tightening around the scrub brush. I expected them to stop talking, or at least lower their voices when they saw me. Instead, they walked right past me to the urinals as if I were a towel rack or a trash can. To them, I was not a human being with ears and a brain. I was a biological appliance functioning solely to maintain their comfort. "It is done," Bill said, his voice echoing off the tiled walls, followed by the sound of a zipper. "The Shenzhou reps signed the preliminary agreement an hour ago. We close on Friday morning. The wire transfer is set for noon. $200 million, Bradley. Can you imagine it?" Bradley chuckled, the sound wet and ugly. "It is a masterpiece, Bill. A true masterpiece. And the best part is that nobody suspects the inventory shortfall. By the time the Chinese auditors open the warehouses, we will be sipping Mai Tais on a private beach." I slowly reached into my pocket, my movements shielded by the stall partition. I tapped the screen of my phone, activating the voice recorder app. The red waveform started to dance, capturing every syllable of their conspiracy. "What about the cleanup?" Bradley asked, the sound of running water filling the room as he washed his hands. "The transition team wants a list of essential personnel to retain." "Essential," Bill scoffed. "Nobody is essential. Fire them all. We liquidate the pension fund to cover the closing costs and let the state deal with the unemployment claims. But make sure Jack is the first one to go." My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept scrubbing the sound of the bristles, masking the blood rushing in my ears. "Why Jack specifically?" Bradley asked, turning off the faucet. "He is cheap labor." "Because he is an embarrassment," Bill spat. "Every time I see him pushing that cart, I am reminded of my daughter's poor judgment. I want him gone, Bradley." Friday at 12:01 p.m. "I want you to hand him a pink slip and have security throw him out on the sidewalk. Tell him it is a restructuring. Tell him he is redundant. Just get him out of my sight." And Natalie, Bradley asked. "She might be upset." "She will get over it," Bill said, grabbing a paper towel and tossing it toward the trash can. It missed landing near my foot. "Once we have the money, she will realize that a factory worker was never good enough for a Harrington. She will come with us to New York. You can comfort her, Bradley. I know you still have a thing for her." Bradley laughed again, a dark, hungry sound. "I might just do that. She looked good today. Real good." They walked toward the door, their steps light and buoyant. Bill stopped for a second, looking down at the back of my head. "Hey, Jack," he called out. "You missed a spot on the sink. Clean it up. We have guests coming tomorrow." They left the door closing with a soft, hydraulic hiss. I remained on my knees, staring at the ball of crumpled paper towel next to my boot. They were going to fire me. They were going to liquidate the pensions of 3,000 workers. And they were planning to pass my wife around like a trophy. I picked up the paper towel and squeezed it in my fist. I stopped the recording and saved the file, naming it The Flush. They treated me like waste, but they forgot one thing. Waste is toxic, and I was about to poison their entire world. The office was silent save for the hum of the air conditioning. I watched from the hallway as Bradley led Natalie toward the elevators, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. They were going to lunch at the Capitol Grill, a $200 meal paid for with the company credit card, while I ate a cold sandwich in the basement. As soon as the elevator doors slid shut, I moved. I pushed my cart into Bradley's office and closed the door, leaving it just a crack ajar so I could hear if anyone approached. I walked around the massive teak desk. The computer monitor was dark, but the power light was blinking. I tapped the spacebar. The screen flared to life instantly. My jaw tightened. There was no password, no biometric lock, nothing. Bradley was so arrogant, so convinced of his own invincibility, that he did not even bother to secure his terminal. He believed that the people who cleaned his office were too stupid to know how to operate a computer, let alone understand what they were looking at. His hubris was my key. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a high-speed encrypted USB drive. I plugged it into the side of the monitor. The drivers installed silently, a feature my tech team had custom-built for this exact moment. I opened the file explorer. It did not take long to find what I was looking for. A folder nested deep within the system directory, labeled simply Project Omega. I opened it. It was a digital graveyard of financial crimes. 2 sets of ledgers, fake invoices from shell companies in the Cayman Islands, emails detailing bribes to safety inspectors, and the pièce de résistance, a spreadsheet calculating the exact payout Bill and Bradley would receive once they gutted the pension fund. I selected everything and dragged it to the USB drive icon. A progress bar appeared on the screen. It moved agonizingly slow. 10%. 20%. I tapped my foot nervously, checking the door. The hallway remained empty. 40%. The drive was copying gigabytes of data, years of theft and deception. Suddenly I heard the distinct click of high heels on the marble floor outside. They were moving fast, coming closer. I looked at the screen. 65%. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I grabbed a bottle of glass cleaner and a rag, spraying a cloud of blue mist into the air, just as the door pushed open. It was Bradley's executive secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen, who had treated me like a fungus since the day I started. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes narrowing, as she saw me standing behind Bradley's desk. "What are you doing back there, Jack?" she snapped, her voice sharp with suspicion. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I kept my hand on the rag, hovering inches above the computer mouse. "I was just cleaning the monitor, Ma," I said, forcing a tremor into my voice, playing the part of the nervous simpleton. Mr. Thorne spilled some coffee. I did not want it to get sticky. She stared at me for a long second, her gaze drift from my face to the screen. The progress bar was at 90%. It was right there in plain sight. If she took one step forward, she would see the file transfer. She would see the USB drive. She would call security. "Well, hurry up," she said, finally stepping into the room but moving toward the coat rack, not the desk. "I forgot my purse. Bradley will kill me if I am late for the lunch reservation." She grabbed a designer bag from the hook and checked her reflection in the mirror, smoothing her skirt. She was 5 feet away from me. 95%. She turned around. "And Jack," she warned, pointing a manicured finger at me, "do not touch any of the papers on his desk. If one thing is out of order, you are fired." "Yes, Ma," I whispered, keeping my body between her and the screen. "I promise." She rolled her eyes and walked out, the heels clicking away down the hall. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. I looked back at the screen. 100%. Transfer complete. I pulled the USB drive and slipped it into my pocket. I had it. I had the smoking gun. I sprayed the monitor one last time, wiping away my fingerprints along with the dust. I grabbed my mop bucket and wheeled it out of the office. As I walked down the hall, I felt the weight of the drive in my pocket. It was light as a feather, but it carried the weight of $1 billion empire, and it was about to bring the whole house down. The smell of industrial pine cleaner clung to my skin like a second layer of sweat. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs, my knees aching from a week of scrubbing floors on my knees. I unlocked the door, expecting the smell of Natalie's cooking, or at least the sound of the TV. Instead, I was met with silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that smelled of dust and departure. The first thing I noticed was the walls. The framed photos of our wedding were gone, leaving behind pale, rectangular ghosts, peeling paint. The knickknacks we had bought at flea markets, the throw pillows, she loved everything that made this dump a home, had vanished. Natalie sat on the beige sofa, her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing her coat buttoned up to her chin, as if the air in the apartment was toxic. Beside her stood 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases, the ones her father had bought her for her birthday. They looked like monoliths in our small living room, blocking the path to the kitchen. She did not stand up. She did not cry. She looked at me with the same detached, clinical expression one uses when deciding to throw away an old pair of shoes. "We need to talk, Jack," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Actually, there is not much to talk about. I think the suitcases say it all." I closed the door behind me, dropping my keys on the counter. The sound echoed loudly in the empty space. I looked at her, then at the bags, then back at her. I was exhausted physically and emotionally, but my mind was razor sharp. I knew this moment was coming. I just did not expect it to happen tonight. I walked over to the fridge, hoping to find a beer, but when I opened it, the shelves were bare except for a half-empty jar of mustard and a single light bulb that flickered ominously. She had taken everything, even the food. "I am leaving you, Jack," she stated simply. "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot wake up every morning knowing my husband cleans toilets for a living. It is embarrassing." I turned slowly to face her. "Is that what this is about?" I asked, my voice rough from lack of use. "My job. The job your father forced me to take. The job you begged me to take." "It is about who you are," she snapped, standing up. "You are content with this life. You are content with mediocrity." Daddy was right. You have no ambition. You have no drive. You are content with being at the bottom, and I refuse to stay there with you. I have a future, Jack. I have opportunities, and I cannot drag you along like a dead weight. She looked at me with pure contempt. She saw a man in a stained blue uniform smelling of bleach. She did not see the man who had spent the last week saving her family from federal prison. She did not see the man who had just secured 51% of the company she worked for. She only saw what she wanted to see. A failure. "I deserve better, Jack," she said, smoothing her skirt. "I deserve a man who can give me the world, not a man who cleans up after the people who run it." The air in the room grew freezing cold. She was not just leaving me. She was discarding me. And she had no idea that the man she was calling a failure was the only reason her family still had a roof over their heads. I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. "Go ahead, Natalie," I thought. "Say it. Say his name. Tell me who you are really leaving me for." She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It hit the coffee table with a heavy final thud, sliding across the wood until it stopped inches from my knee. I did not need to open it to know what it was. The legal font visible through the plastic window screamed the truth I had been denying. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words were black and stark against the white paper, a formal end to 3 years of what I thought was a partnership. "Sign it, Jack," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Make this easy for both of us. Do not fight me on this. We both know you cannot afford a lawyer anyway, so do not pretend you are going to contest it." I looked at the document. Irreconcilable differences. That was the legal term. The real term was hypergamy. She was trading up, or at least she thought she was. I looked up at her, searching her face for any trace of the woman who used to dance with me in the rain. There was nothing, just a hard, ambitious stranger. "Is this because of Bradley?" I asked quietly. I needed her to say it. I needed the confession etched into the record of my memory. She let out a short, cruel laugh, throwing her head back. "Bradley? No, Jack, this is about you, but since you asked, yes, Bradley is part of the equation. He is going to be named Executive Vice President on Friday morning. Did you know that?" "Of course you did not. You are too busy unclogging drains to know what happens in the boardroom." She stepped closer, towering over me as I sat on the sofa. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of pity and triumph. "Bradley has vision, Jack. He has drive. He wakes up every morning wanting to conquer the world. You wake up wanting to survive it. That is the difference. I need a partner who challenges me, who elevates me. Bradley deserves a woman who can stand beside him at the top to apologize for her husband's blue-collar stench at every gala. The words hit me like physical blows. She was rewriting our history. The nights I stayed up helping her study for her business degree, the extra shifts I took so she could take an unpaid internship. All of that was erased, replaced by the shiny promise of Bradley's stolen fortune. "He is going to take care of me, Jack," she continued, her voice softening just a fraction as she fantasized about her new life. "He is going to take me to New York. He is going to buy me the things I have always wanted, the things you promised but never delivered. I am 28 years old. I cannot wait for you to figure your life out. I have to bet on the winning horse." She pulled a pen from her purse. It was a Mont Blanc, probably a gift from Bradley purchased with embezzled funds. She clicked it open and set it on top of the papers. "Sign it. Release me. It is the only gift you can afford to give me right now." I looked at the pen, then at the woman I had sworn to love in sickness and in health. She was sick with greed, and I was the cure she was rejecting. She thought Bradley was the winning horse. She did not realize she was betting on a beast that was about to be put down. I reached for the pen, my hand steady. If she wanted to be free to crash and burn, I would not stand in her way. I uncapped the pen and looked at the signature line. This was not an ending. It was a release. Not for her, but for me. The thin wooden door of our apartment did not open, it exploded inward. There was no knock, no doorbell, just the sudden violent intrusion of my in-laws. Bill Harrington marched in first, his face a mask of red-faced fury, followed closely by Catherine, who clutched her pearl necklace as if the very air in my home might tarnish it. They looked out of place in the cramped entryway like peacocks in a coal mine, their expensive clothes a stark contrast to the peeling wallpaper. Bill did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He looked at Natalie, then at the papers on the table, and finally at me. "Is it done?" he barked, his voice booming in the small space. "Did he sign, or do I have to call legal?" Natalie stood up, wiping a tear that I knew was fake. "He is reading it, Daddy," she said, playing the victim perfectly. "He is making this difficult." Bill stormed over to the sofa, looming over me. I smelled his cologne, stale cigars, and arrogance. He pointed a thick finger at my face. "Listen to me, boy. You are going to pick up that pen, and you are going to sign your name, and then you are going to get out of my daughter's life forever. We are not playing games here." Catherine began moving around the room, picking up Natalie's things with 2 fingers, dropping them into the open suitcases as if they were contaminated. "Hurry up, darling," she said, her nose wrinkled in disgust. "We need to get you out of this squalor. I do not know how you survived here this long. It smells like failure." I sat still, looking up at Bill. He thought he was intimidating me. He thought he was the shark in the tank. He had no idea he was bleeding in the water. "I am reading the terms, Bill," I said calmly. "Clause 6 says I walk away with nothing. No alimony, no division of assets." "Assets?" Bill laughed, a harsh barking sound. "What assets, Jack?" "This couch. The rust bucket parked outside." "You have nothing. You are nothing. You are a leech, Jack. A parasite who latched onto my daughter, hoping for a free ride. Well, the ride is over." He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. "Let me make this crystal clear. If you do not sign that paper right now, I will unleash a team of lawyers on you that will make your life a living hell. I will sue you for emotional distress. I will sue you for fraud. I will ensure you never get a job in this state again, not even scrubbing toilets. I will bury you in so much debt you will wish you were dead." I looked at him, then at Catherine, who was busy ignoring me, then at Natalie, who looked away. They were a united front of greed and cruelty. They truly believed I was a beggar trying to steal their coins. They did not know I had a vault full of gold bars waiting for me. "You want me to walk away with nothing?" I asked, my voice steady. I want you to crawl away, Bill corrected. Sign, now. I picked up the pen again. The threat was empty because his power was an illusion. He was threatening a man who could buy his entire existence. I looked him in the eye and uncapped the pen. You are right, Bill, I said. I do not want anything from you, not a single cent, because dirty money always leaves a stain, and I prefer my hands clean. I pressed the pen to the paper one last time, signing away 3 years of my life. The ink was barely dry before Bill snatched the document from the table, inspecting my signature like a diamond merchant looking for flaws. He nodded once, satisfied that I had legally severed all ties to his precious daughter, and more importantly, to her future assets. Good Bill grunted, handing the papers to Catherine, who tucked them away in her purse like a war trophy. Now get out. I blinked, looking at him standing in the center of the living room I had painted myself. Excuse me, I said. I said get out, Bill repeated, checking his gold Rolex as if my presence was wasting his valuable time. This is my daughter's apartment. You are trespassing. I stood up slowly, my height finally towering over him, though he refused to be intimidated. Bill, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. I have paid the rent on this place for 36 months. I bought this furniture. I pay the electric bill. I pay for the internet you are currently connected to. Technically, this is my home. Bill let out a bark of laughter that sounded like a car engine backfiring. Technically, he mocked, getting in my face, his breath smelling of stale coffee. Your name is not on the lease, boy. Natalie signed the contract. You are just a guest who has overstayed his welcome. And since you are no longer her husband, you have exactly 5 minutes to vacate the premises before I call the police and have you removed for domestic disturbance. Do you really want an arrest record, Jack? It might hurt your chances of finding another toilet to scrub. I looked at Natalie. She was busy examining her fingernails, refusing to meet my gaze. She knew I paid for the roof over her head. She knew I worked double shifts at the factory to cover the security deposit because her credit score was too low. But she said nothing. She sat there in silence, letting her father rewrite reality because it suited her narrative. She was erasing me from the lease just as she had erased me from her life. Catherine did not wait for me to pack. She walked into the bedroom and emerged a moment later with an armful of my clothes. My work shirts, my jeans, my only good sweater. She walked to the front door, opened it, and threw them onto the wet concrete walkway outside. It had started to rain, a cold, miserable Detroit drizzle that soaked everything instantly. My clothes landed in a muddy puddle, absorbing the grime of the city. Catherine dusted off her hands as if she had just touched something infectious. You can collect the rest from the dumpster tomorrow, she sneered, looking at me with pure revulsion. We need to sanitize this place before Bradley comes over. We do not want him to catch whatever mediocrity you have. I looked at the three of them one last time. The father who bullied me, the mother who despised me, and the wife who sold me out. They stood united in their cruelty, a wall of arrogance that they thought was impenetrable. I did not say a word. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me beg or scream. I turned around and walked out into the rain. I bent down and picked up my soaked jacket, the water running down my arms. Behind me, the door slammed shut, the deadbolt sliding home with a heavy final thud. I stood there alone in the dark, shivering in the cold rain, holding a bundle of wet clothes. To anyone watching, I looked like a man who had lost everything. A homeless failure kicked to the curb. But as I wiped the rain from my eyes, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. They had just evicted the only person who could save them. They thought they had thrown out the trash. They did not realize they had just locked themselves inside a burning building. And I was the one holding the matches. The motel was called the Traveler's Rest, a name that was more aspirational than descriptive. It was a block of concrete rooms sandwiched between a strip mall and an interstate highway. I paid cash for a single room on the ground floor, the clerk eyeing my wet clothes with the weary suspicion of someone who has seen too many desperate men. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. The carpet was a suspicious shade of brown, and the bedspread had a pattern that seemed designed to hide stains. I stripped off my soaked clothes and hung them over the shower rod. I stood under the hot water, letting it beat against my back, washing away the rain and the humiliation. I stayed there until the water ran cold, until my skin was pink and raw. Then I wrapped a thin towel around my waist and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. Outside, the rain lashed against the window pane, a relentless rhythm that matched the throbbing in my head. I reached for my phone, the only possession I had managed to keep dry. I opened the gallery and scrolled back. 3 years. It was not a lifetime, but it felt like one. I found a photo from our first date. We were eating ice cream on a park bench, Natalie laughing with a smudge of chocolate on her nose. She looked happy then. Simple. Uncomplicated. I scrolled forward. A selfie from our honeymoon, a road trip to the Upper Peninsula. We were camping in a tent because we could not afford a hotel. She is wearing a flannel shirt, her hair messy from the wind, smiling at me as if I were the only man in the world. I lingered on that image, my thumb hovering over her face. That was the woman I married. That was the woman I was trying to save. Then came the later photos. Natalie in a new dress, looking bored at a family dinner. Natalie checking her phone while I tried to talk to her. Natalie smiling at Bradley at a company picnic. The transformation was subtle at first, but undeniable. The light in her eyes had changed, shifting from warmth to calculation. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away furiously. I was not crying for the woman who kicked me out. I was crying for the man I used to be, the optimistic fool who believed that love could conquer ambition. That man died tonight on a wet sidewalk in Detroit. I selected the first photo. Delete. Confirm. The image vanished. I selected the next one. Delete. Confirm. One by one, I erased the evidence of my happiness. I deleted the honeymoon, the birthdays, the quiet Sunday mornings. I was not just clearing memory space. I was cauterizing a wound. I was removing the weakness that had made me vulnerable. When the gallery was empty, save for the evidence against Bill and Bradley, I put the phone down. The room felt even emptier now. I lay back on the lumpy mattress, listening to the trucks rumble by on the highway. Tomorrow I would not be Jack the husband or Jack the janitor. Tomorrow I would be Jack Dawson, the billionaire, and I would not need memories. I would need focus. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the rain wash away the last of my hesitation. The mourning period was over. The execution was about to begin. The morning sun filtered through the grime of the motel window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. It was a depressing sight, but today it looked like a spotlight on a stage. I walked out into the parking lot, the asphalt still damp from the storm. I was wearing the same wrinkled jeans and t-shirt I had slept in, the clothes of a man who had nothing. But at exactly 8:00 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. A long, sleek black shape turned into the parking lot, gliding over the potholes with a ghostly silence that defied physics. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase with tinted windows that reflected the gritty reality of Detroit back at itself. It looked like a spaceship that had landed in a junkyard. The car stopped directly in front of me. The driver, a mountain of a man in a black suit, opened the rear door. Elias Blackwood stepped out. He looked impeccable in a charcoal three-piece suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, not a single hair out of place despite the wind. He held a garment bag in one hand and a leather briefcase in the other. He looked at the motel, then at me, and offered a slight, respectful nod. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson," he said, his voice cutting through the noise of the highway. "Your carriage awaits." I tossed the lukewarm motel coffee into a nearby trash can. It hit the bottom with a hollow thud. That was the last sound Jack the janitor would make. I beckoned Blackwood into the room. He hung the garment bag on the rusted hook on the back of the door. I unzipped it. The smell of Italian wool and cedar filled the small room, overpowering the scent of stale smoke. Inside was a bespoke Tom Ford suit cut to my exact measurements, midnight blue with a subtle herringbone pattern. It was not just clothing. It was armor. I stripped off the cheap denim and cotton. I put on the crisp white shirt fastening the mother-of-pearl buttons. I pulled on the trousers, feeling the weight of the fabric, the way it draped perfectly. I tied the silk tie in a full Windsor knot, my fingers moving with a muscle memory I had suppressed for years. Finally, I slipped on the jacket. It hugged my shoulders like a second skin, transforming my silhouette. I looked in the cracked bathroom mirror. The man looking back was not the husband who begged for affection. He was the shark who swallowed companies whole. Blackwood opened the briefcase and took out a velvet box. He handed it to me. I opened it. Inside sat a Patek Philippe Nautilus, the rose gold gleaming under the flickering bathroom light. $200,000 of Swiss engineering. I clasped it around my wrist. The weight of the gold felt grounding. It was a reminder that time was the most valuable asset, and I was done wasting mine. I adjusted my cuffs and turned to Blackwood. He smiled, a shark acknowledging another shark. "You look ready, sir," he said. I checked my reflection one last time. I did not see Jack. I saw the executioner. "Let us go," I said, walking out of the motel room, leaving the key on the unmade bed. The boardroom was waiting. The heavy door of the Phantom clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the highway and the misery of the last 3 years. The interior was a cocoon of silence and hand-stitched leather that smelled of power. I settled into the seat, stretching my legs out. It felt foreign at first, like a muscle I had not used in a long time, but then the memory of who I was came rushing back. I was not Jack the janitor anymore. I was Jack Dawson, the man who moved markets with a whisper. Blackwood opened his laptop, the screen glowing in the dim cabin. He turned it toward me, his face illuminated by the blue light of the trading charts. The graph showed a vertical green line spiking upward. It was a beautiful sight. "We crossed the threshold at 9:03 this morning," Blackwood reported, his voice calm and professional. "We swept the Asian markets while Bill was sleeping. We picked up the last block of retail shares 5 minutes ago. You now control 51.03% of Harrington Logistics. You are the majority shareholder. You own the table, the chairs, and the very air they are breathing right now." I looked at the number. 51%. It was more than a number. It was a weapon. With that percentage, I could dissolve the board. I could veto the sale to the Chinese. I could fire the CEO without cause. I traced the line on the screen with my finger. "And the other matter?" I asked, looking up. Blackwood tapped a key. "The anonymous whistleblower complaint was filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission 10 minutes ago. We included the audio file from the restroom and the forensic accounting data you recovered from Bradley's computer. The SEC Enforcement Division is already mobilizing. They are dispatching a team to secure the building. They will be there within the hour." "Perfect," I said. "Bill thinks he is walking into a victory lap. He is walking into a federal raid." The car glided onto the highway, merging effortlessly with the traffic. People in other cars looked over, their eyes wide, seeing the Rolls-Royce, wondering who was inside. They saw a rich man. They did not see a predator on his way to a kill. "The emergency board meeting is scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock. Blackwood said, checking his watch. "Bill and Bradley are presenting the sale proposal to the remaining board members. They expect to sign the final papers by noon." I looked out the tinted window. The city of Detroit rolled by a gray landscape of concrete and steel. In the distance, I could see the Harrington Logistics Tower rising above the skyline. It looked like a glass needle piercing the clouds. For years, I had walked into that building through the service entrance. I had bowed my head. I had made myself small. Today I was going to walk through the front door and I was going to fill the entire lobby. "They are popping champagne right now," I murmured, watching the tower get closer. "They are toasting to their golden parachutes. They are laughing about the janitor they fired." Blackwood looked at me, waiting for the order. The driver slowed slightly as we approached the exit ramp. "Where to, sir?" Blackwood asked. I adjusted my cufflinks, feeling the cold metal against my skin. I fixed my tie, ensuring the knot was perfect. I looked at the tower one last time, my eyes narrowing. "Take us to the front door," I said, my voice low and final. "Drive." The cork popped with a sharp, festive sound that echoed off the glass walls of the boardroom. It was the sound of victory. Bill Harrington held the bottle of vintage Dom Perignon like a trophy, pouring the bubbling gold liquid into 3 crystal flutes. The room was bathed in the morning sunlight, offering a panoramic view of Detroit, the city they were about to sell out. On the table sat the final contract for the sale of Harrington Logistics to the Shenzhou Group. It was just waiting for the final signature, which was scheduled for noon. Bill raised his glass, his face flushed with the intoxication of impending wealth. To the deal of the century, he announced, his voice thick with self-satisfaction. To $200 million. To retirement in the south of France. And to never having to look at a balance sheet ever again. Bradley clinked his glass against Bill's, grinning like a cheater who had just swept the pot. "To us," Bradley said. "The visionaries. We saw the opportunity when everyone else saw a sinking ship. We trimmed the fat. We cooked we corrected the numbers, and now we cash out." Natalie sat between them, sipping her champagne with a delicate, practiced elegance. She looked relieved. The tension of the last week had evaporated, replaced by the glow of acceptance. She was finally where she wanted to be, at the big table, making the big decisions. She looked at the contract, then at her father. "I am so proud of you, Daddy," she said. "You built this. You deserve this." Bill laughed, taking a large gulp of wine. "We all deserve this, sweetheart. Especially you. You showed real strength yesterday, getting rid of that anchor around your neck. I know it was hard, but it was necessary. You cannot fly with a stone tied to your leg." They all chuckled, the sound grating and cruel. They were talking about me. Bradley leaned back in his leather chair, putting his feet up on the edge of the table. "You should have seen him at the security desk," Bradley mocked. "He looked like a lost puppy. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I remembered he was wearing a polyester uniform that cost less than my socks." Natalie swirled her glass, staring at the bubbles. "I just hope he does not try to contact me," she said coldly. "I blocked his number. I do not want him begging for money when he finds out how much we made from this deal. He had his chance. He chose to be a janitor. I chose to be a Harrington." "You made the right choice," Bill said, patting her hand. "We are going to find you a real man now. Someone with status. Someone like Bradley here. Someone who fits the picture." The air in the room was thick with hubris. They were drunk on their own reflection. They truly believed they had won. They believed the world was just a playground for their desires, and everyone else was just scenery. They had no idea that the elevator was currently rising toward them, carrying a force of nature that would shatter their glass castle into a million pieces. Bill looked at his watch. 10 o'clock. The rest of the board is late. Typical. They are probably stuck in traffic. Bradley laughed. "Let them be late. We have the voting power. We control the room. Nothing can stop this train now." They raised their glasses for another toast, oblivious to the fact that the train was not just stopping. It was about to derail. The light on the elevator panel turned green. The doors began to slide open. The celebration was over. The reckoning had arrived. The intercom on the conference table buzzed a harsh electronic sound that sliced through their self-congratulatory laughter like a knife. Bill looked annoyed, his hand hovering over the speaker. He pressed the button with an aggressive stab of his finger, his face flushing with irritation at the interruption of his victory lap. "What is it, Susan?" he barked into the machine. "I told you we were not to be disturbed until the signing. I am about to become a very rich man, and I do not want to be interrupted by trivialities." The secretary's voice came through the speaker, trembling with a nervous energy that should have warned them. "Mr. Harrington, I am so sorry, but the representatives from Apex Capital are here. They are demanding immediate entry. They say it is urgent. They say the board meeting is starting now." Apex Bill frowned, looking at Bradley with confusion clouding his arrogance. "They are just silent investors. We have never heard a peep from them in 5 years. Why are they sending a delegation now?" "Send them in," he commanded, waving his hand dismissively. "Maybe they want to congratulate me in person. Or maybe they want to beg for a bigger slice of the pie. Let them come." The heavy double mahogany doors did not just open, they were pushed wide by 2 men who looked like they were carved out of granite. They were private security, heavily built, and wearing earpieces, scanning the room with professional detachment. They stepped aside, creating a corridor. Then came the lawyers, a phalanx of legal sharks led by Elias Blackwood, moving with the precision of a military unit carrying briefcases that looked like weapons. They fanned out, lining the walls, changing the atmosphere of the room from a party to a tribunal. And then from the shadows of the hallway, I stepped into the light. I was not wearing the stained blue polyester uniform with the name tag that said, "Just Jack." I was wearing $5,000 of midnight blue Italian wool, cut by a master tailor to accentuate the power in my shoulders. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine, clicking rhythmically against the floorboards I used to scrub. On my wrist, the Patek Philippe caught the sunlight, flashing a warning. I walked into the room, and the silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the sound of 3 hearts skipping a beat simultaneously. It was the sound of reality crashing into their delusion. I walked past Natalie. I heard her sharp intake of breath, the sound of a champagne flute slipping from her numb fingers and crashing onto the polished wood table, spilling golden liquid across the contract. She stared at me, her eyes wide and terrified, unable to process the image. She looked at my face, then at my suit, then back at my face, trying to find the husband she had thrown away. I walked past Bradley. His mouth was hanging open, his face draining of color, as his brain tried to reconcile the janitor he mocked with the titan standing before him. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. I walked past Bill. He was half rising from his chair, his eyes bulging, a vein throbbing in his temple, his face turning a shade of purple that suggested an imminent stroke. I did not say a word. I did not need to. The click of my heels on the floor was the only language necessary. It was the sound of authority. I walked straight to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the chairman of the board. I pulled out the leather chair, the leather creaking in the silence, and sat down. I placed my hands on the table, interlacing my fingers, and looked at them. The room was mine. The company was mine. And their time was up. Bradley was the first to break the paralysis that had gripped the room. His brain simply could not process the visual data. He did not see a man in a $10,000 suit. He saw the guy who cleaned his coffee stains. He saw the subhuman creature he had mocked in the bathroom. He jumped up from his chair, knocking it backward with a loud clatter, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Security!" He screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of confusion and outrage. "Where is security? How did this trash get in here? Get him out! Someone call the front desk and tell them to drag this janitor out of the building before he steals the silverware." He looked around wildly, expecting the granite-faced men who had entered with me to obey his command. But they did not move. They stood with their backs to the wall, their arms crossed, staring at him with the impassive boredom of professionals who knew exactly who signed their paychecks. And it was not Bradley Thorne. Bill was next. The purple hue of his face darkened to a dangerous maroon. He slammed his fist on the table, causing the champagne glasses to jump. You have lost your mind, Jack, he bellowed, spittle flying from his mouth, landing on the contract he was so desperate to sign. I fired you. I kicked you out of my house. And you dare to walk into my boardroom. You dare to sit in my chair. He leaned over the table, invading my personal space, his eyes bulging. You have 5 seconds to get out of that seat before I have you arrested for trespassing. This is a private meeting for shareholders and executives, not for the cleaning staff. Do you hear me, boy? Get out. I sat there perfectly still. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I let their anger wash over me like water over a rock. Their insults, which used to sting like acid, now felt like the desperate squeaks of mice caught in a trap. I leaned back in the leather chair, the same chair Bill had sat in for 20 years, and crossed my legs. I adjusted the cuff of my jacket, revealing the rose-gold Patek Philippe. The light caught the watch face, sending a glint across the room that caught Natalie's eye. She was the only one not screaming. She was staring at the watch, then at my face, then at the lawyer standing silently by my side. I saw the gears turning in her head. She recognized the suit. She recognized the watch. She recognized the aura of power that radiated from me. It was an aura she had spent her whole life chasing, and she had never realized it was sleeping beside her every night. Her hand went to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She pulled at Bradley's sleeve, trying to get him to stop shouting, but he was too far gone in his rage. "This is insane," Bradley continued yelling, his face twisted into a mask of ugly entitlement. "Look at him, Bill. He is playing dress-up. He probably stole that suit. He is delusional." I finally moved. I reached out and picked up the bottle of Dom Perignon that Bill had been pouring. I poured the remaining champagne into a clean glass. The sound of the liquid filling the flute was the only sound in the room as Bradley finally ran out of breath. I took a sip, savoring the taste of their prematurely celebrated victory. Then I set the glass down and looked at Elias Blackwood. "Tell them," I said softly. My voice was not loud, but in the sudden silence it sounded like a gavel striking a block. Elias Blackwood stepped forward from my right side, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of an executioner raising his axe. He did not shout to match their volume. He did not look intimidated by Bill's red-faced blustering or Bradley's shrill accusations. He simply held up a hand, a single manicured palm, facing outward. It was a gesture of such absolute authority that it sucked the air out of the room. Bradley stopped mid-sentence, his mouth still open like a fish gasping on a dock. Bill froze his face, a portrait of confused rage. They looked at the lawyer, waiting for an explanation, waiting for an apology, waiting for him to tell them that this was all a hideous mistake and that security was on the way. "Gentlemen," Blackwood said, his voice smooth baritone resonating off the glass walls, "I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding the seating arrangements. You seem to be laboring under the impression that you are addressing a trespassing former employee. You are not." Blackwood gestured toward me with an open hand, a movement that commanded attention. "Allow me to formally introduce my client. This is Mr. Jack Dawson. He is the founder and sole proprietor of Apex Capital. As of 9:05 this morning, Mr. Dawson successfully acquired the remaining outstanding retail shares of Harrington Logistics." Blackwood paused, letting the name Apex Capital sink in. They knew the name. It was the fund that had saved them 5 years ago. The mysterious benefactor they had never met. The fund they feared. Combined with his existing holdings held through various shell entities, Blackwood continued, his voice driving the nails into the coffin. "Mr. Dawson now controls 51.03% of the voting stock of this corporation. He is not the janitor. He is the majority shareholder. He is the chairman of the board. And effectively, gentlemen, he is your boss." The silence that followed was heavy, physical, and suffocating. It was not the silence of a library. It was the silence of a tomb immediately after the stone has been rolled across the entrance. I watched the blood drain from Bill's face. It went from purple to a sickly shade of gray in a matter of seconds. His eyes darted from Blackwood to me, trying to find the lie, trying to find the joke. But there was no joke. The math was absolute. 51%. It was a number that ended his reign. It was a number that turned his king into a pawn. Natalie let out a sound, a small whimpering gasp that sounded like a wounded animal. She looked at the man she had divorced yesterday, the man she had kicked out into the rain. She looked at the suit that cost more than her car. She looked at the watch that cost more than her house. And she realized with a horror that was almost palpable that she had just walked away from a kingdom to settle for a cottage. Bradley slumped back against the wall, his legs giving out. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind only a terrified sweat. I leaned forward slightly, the leather of the chair groaning under the shift in weight. I looked at Bill directly in the eye. The silence stretched on a beautiful, agonizing symphony of their destruction. I had waited 5 years for this moment. I had scrubbed their floors. I had taken their trash. I had swallowed their insults. And now I was going to make them swallow the truth. I reached out and took the thick black folder from Blackwood. It was heavy with the weight of their crimes. I slid it across the mahogany table. It spun just like the employment contract Bill had thrown at me the night before, but this document did not offer a job. It offered a prison sentence. It came to rest right in front of Bill, knocking over his half-empty glass of champagne. The liquid spilled onto the white tablecloth, spreading like a stain of blood. "Open it, Bill," I said, my voice soft but echoing in the terrified silence. "Go ahead. It is not a birthday gift. It is an autopsy report." Bill stared at the folder, his hands shaking so badly he could barely lift the cover. When he finally flipped it open, his face went white. He was looking at his own secret ledgers, the fabricated invoices from Vector Logistics, the emails to the Caymans, the proof that his $1.5 billion empire was a house of cards built on fraud. "These are the real numbers," I said, standing up slowly. "Not the fairy tales you tell the shareholders. Revenue is down 40%. You have been cannibalizing the inventory to pay the dividends. You are not selling a company, Bill. You are selling a crime scene." "That is a lie," Bradley stammered, his voice high and shrill, trying to deny the ink on the page. "You forged those. You are trying to frame us." I smiled a cold, humorless smile. "I knew you would say that, Bradley. You always blame someone else. But I thought you might want to hear the truth from a more reliable source. Yourself." I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen, connecting it to the boardroom's teleconference system. I pressed play. The speakers overhead crackled to life, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of running water and the unmistakable echo of the executive washroom. "It is a masterpiece, Bill." Bradley's voice boomed through the room, clear and undeniable. "We padded the shipping manifests just like we discussed. Nobody checks the tear weight." Then came Bill's voice, distinct and arrogant. "Fire them all. We liquidate the pension fund to cover the closing costs. Make sure Jack is the first one to go." Natalie gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked from the speaker to her father, then to Bradley. She was hearing them conspire not just to steal, but to destroy the lives of thousands of families, including her husband's. The recording continued, Bradley's voice dripping with greed. "By the time the Chinese auditors open the warehouses, we will be sipping Mai Tais. Nobody suspects a thing." I stopped the recording. The silence that returned was heavier than before. It was the silence of guilt. Natalie looked at Bradley with horror. "You lied," she whispered. "You told me the company was stronger than ever. You told me we were building a legacy." I looked at them. The father who sold his soul, the boyfriend who stole the silver, and the wife who believed their lies. I leaned forward, resting my knuckles on the table. "You called me a janitor," I said. "Well, you were right, because I am about to clean up the biggest mess this city has ever seen." The echo of their recorded confessions faded, leaving a vacuum of pure panic in the room. I did not give them a moment to recover. I did not give them a chance to formulate a lie or beg for mercy. I looked at Elias Blackwood and gave him a single sharp nod. It was the signal to drop the blade. I turned my gaze to Bradley first. He was trembling, his face a mask of sweaty terror, as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. "Bradley Thorne," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You are relieved of your duties as Director of Sales effective immediately. Your access badges are deactivated. Your company car has already been towed, and do not bother checking your offshore accounts. Our forensic accountants froze them 10 minutes ago. You are fired for cause for gross misconduct, corporate espionage, and embezzlement." Bradley slumped back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He looked at Natalie for help, but she was staring at the table, unable to lift her head under the weight of the shame. I turned to the man at the end of the table, the man who had mocked my poverty, the man who had kicked me into the rain. William Harrington. I continued, my voice dropping an octave. "As the majority shareholder, I am exercising my right to restructure the executive leadership team. You are hereby removed as CEO of Harrington Logistics. You are stripped of your voting rights. You are no longer authorized to speak on behalf of this company or step foot on this property." Bill finally found his voice. It was a strangled, desperate shout. "You cannot do this, Jack. I built this place. It is my name on the building. You cannot just come in here and steal it." "I did not steal it, Bill," I corrected him, leaning forward. "I bought it. I paid market price plus a premium, which is more than you deserve considering you were trying to sell a rotting carcass to the Chinese." I stood up, walking slowly toward him, until I was standing right next to the chair he used to rule from. I looked down at him, shrinking in his seat. "And regarding your exit package," I said, "there is no golden parachute. There is no severance. Because we are pressing charges. The district attorney is waiting in the lobby with an indictment for securities fraud and grand larceny. You are not retiring to the south of France, Bill. You are going to federal prison." I placed my hands on the back of his chair and leaned in close so only he could hear the final nail in his coffin. "Do you remember the offer you made me last night, Bill? You sat at your dinner table surrounded by your wealth and offered me $35,000 a year to clean your toilets. You thought that was charity. You thought you were being generous to the poor factory worker." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You tried to buy my dignity for 35 grand. But here is the reality. I just bought your entire life's work. I bought your legacy. I bought your pride. And I did it with the money I keep in my petty cash account. It turns out, Bill, your empire was not worth that much after all. I bought you with my pocket change. Now get out of my chair." The double doors did not open politely this time. They burst inward, hitting the stoppers with a violent crash that made Natalie scream. A team of federal agents in windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI poured into the room, moving with the synchronized aggression of a pack of wolves. They did not care about the mahogany table or the panoramic view or the expensive suits. To them, this was just another crime scene. "Federal agents. Everyone remain where you are," a voice bellowed, commanding the room. A tall agent with a stern face pointed a finger directly at the head of the table. "William Harrington and Bradley Thorne, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. Place your hands on your heads and turn away from the table. Now." Bradley broke first. The arrogance that had defined him for years evaporated instantly, leaving behind a terrified child. He scrambled backward, his chair tipping over with a loud clatter. "It was not me," he shrieked, his voice cracking high and pathetic. "I was just following orders. It was Bill. He made me do it. I have the emails, I can testify. Please do not arrest me." He was blubbering, pleading, selling out his partner before the handcuffs even touched his wrists. An agent grabbed him, spinning him around and slamming him against the glass wall. The cold metallic click of the cuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the silent room. It was the sound of a career ending. Bill stood frozen. He looked at the agents, then at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. He could not comprehend that the laws applied to him. He was Bill Harrington. He owned this city. He looked at the agent approaching him with a mixture of confusion and outrage. "Do you know who I am?" he sputtered, saliva flying from his lips. "You cannot touch me. I will have your badge. I will sue your entire department." The agent did not even blink. He grabbed Bill's arm, twisting it behind his back with practiced efficiency. "You have the right to remain silent." The agent recited, his voice bored and mechanical. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The pain of the arm lock forced Bill to bend over, his face pressed against the very table where he had planned his victory toast. The handcuffs clicked shut, binding his hands behind his back. The reality finally pierced his delusion. He was not a king anymore. He was a prisoner. He twisted his head frantically, looking for a lifeline. His eyes locked onto mine. "Jack," he screamed, desperation clawing at his throat. "Jack, tell them. Tell them this is a mistake. I am your father-in-law. We are family. You cannot let them take me away. Stop this madness." I stood there impassive, watching the man who had tormented me for years beg for my help. He appealed to a family bond he had severed the moment he handed me a janitor's uniform. He appealed to a relationship he had spat on. "Jack, please," he wailed, tears streaming down his purple face. "I will give you anything. I will give you the company. I will give you the house. Just tell them to stop." I took a slow sip of the champagne I had poured earlier. The bubbles tasted crisp and cold. I looked at the agent. "Take him away," I said quietly. "The trash needs to be taken out." They dragged him toward the door, his heels dragging on the carpet. He continued to scream my name, begging, bargaining, crying, but I did not look at him. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. The king was dead, and the castle was finally clean. The heavy oak doors swung shut, cutting off the wails of her father and her lover, leaving us in a silence that felt heavier than the noise. The boardroom, which had been a theater of triumph just 20 minutes ago, was now a wreckage of spilled wine and overturned chairs. I stood at the head of the table looking down. Natalie was the only one left. The queen of the castle was now standing in the ruins of her kingdom. She looked at the empty doorway where Bradley had been dragged out. Then she looked at me. Her composure, the mask of the icy executive she had worn so perfectly, finally cracked. She did not just cry, she crumbled. Her legs seemed to lose their bone structure, and she collapsed to the floor, sinking onto the plush carpet amidst the shards of broken glass. She did not care about her cream-colored dress or her dignity. She crawled toward me, moving on her hands and knees until she was at my feet. She reached out, grabbing the hem of my trousers, her hands trembling so violently that I could feel the vibration against my leg. "Jack," she sobbed, her voice ragged and wet with tears. "You have to listen to me. I did not know, I swear to you, I did not know what they were doing. I was a victim too. Daddy forced me. He told me if I did not divorce you, he would cut me off. He threatened to ruin your life. I did it to protect you, Jack. I only signed those papers to save you from him." I looked down at her. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks, turning her face into a tragic mask. It was a compelling performance. If I had not seen her laugh while I signed the contract the night before, I might have believed her. "I still love you," she pleaded, looking up at me with wide, desperate eyes. "I never stopped loving you, not for a second." Bradley meant nothing to me. He was just a boss. "You are my husband. You are the only man I have ever loved." She tightened her grip on my leg as if she were drowning, and I was the only piece of driftwood in the ocean. "Remember the tent, Jack. Remember our honeymoon in the Upper Peninsula. It was freezing, and we only had one sleeping bag, so we held each other all night. You told me you would always take care of me. We were happy then, Jack. We did not need money. We just needed each other. We can have that again. She sniffed, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. But now it will be even better. We have the company now. You and me. We can run it together. We can be the power couple we always talked about. I can help you, Jack. I know the business. I know the clients. Please do not throw us away because of a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. She buried her face against my knee, weeping loudly, her shoulders shaking. She was invoking the sacred ghosts of our past, trying to use our shared history as a shield against her betrayal. She brought up the cold nights and the cheap pizza, trying to remind me of the girl I fell in love with. But that girl was dead. She had died the moment Natalie chose a Porsche over her husband. I watched her beg, I watched her debase herself, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity. Just a cold, clinical observation of a stranger trying to manipulate a situation she had lost control of. She was not crying because she lost me. She was crying because she realized she had just thrown away the winning lottery ticket. I reached down and peeled her fingers off my trousers, one by one. I did not do it with violence, but with the detached efficiency of a man removing a piece of lint. I took a step back, creating a physical chasm between us that was far wider than the 3 feet of carpet. I looked at her kneeling there in the wreckage of her own ambition, and I waited for a flicker of emotion to ignite in my chest. I waited for anger or pity, or even a ghost of the love she was claiming to desperately hold on to. But there was nothing. My heart was a frozen lake, and she was just a stone resting on the surface. "Stand up, Natalie," I said, my voice flat and devoid of warmth. "Have some dignity. You look ridiculous." She scrambled to her feet, wiping the black streaks of mascara from her cheeks, trying to compose herself, trying to shift back into the role of the supportive wife. "We can fix this, Jack," she stammered, smoothing her dress. "We can annul the papers. We can start over." I walked over to the mahogany table, avoiding the puddle of spilled champagne. I picked up the leather folder containing the divorce decree she had forced me to sign less than 24 hours ago. "There is nothing to annul," I said, opening the folder and staring at the signature line. "My legal team filed this document with the county clerk at 8:01 this morning. The judge stamped it at 8:05. The marriage is dissolved, Natalie. It is over. Legally and permanently." "But we can remarry," she pleaded, taking a hopeful step toward me. "We can do it right this time. A big wedding. No prenuptial agreement. Just us sharing everything." I let out a short, dry laugh. "You really do not understand, do you? You think you missed out on a payday. You think if you had stayed married to me, you would be entitled to half of my fortune. But you are wrong." I closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Even if you were still my wife, you would be walking away with nothing. You see, Natalie, I did not build my fortune yesterday. Apex Capital is protected by a series of irrevocable blind trusts established long before I ever met you. The assets are locked down. The beneficiary is the trust itself. I draw a salary. I own nothing on paper. If you had stayed, you would have been the wife of a billionaire, but you would never have owned a cent of the billions. And now, since you signed the waiver yesterday forfeiting all spousal support, you are not just divorced. You are destitute." Her face went pale as the financial reality hit her. She realized she had not just lost a husband, she had lost her survival strategy. "The feds are seizing your father's assets as we speak," I continued relentlessly. "The house in the suburbs, the cars, the accounts. It is all going to restitution. You have nowhere to go, Natalie. You are homeless." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. It was wrinkled and stained with coffee. It was the employment contract Bill had thrown at me the night before. I smoothed it out on the table next to the empty champagne bottle. "However, I am a fair man," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I believe in giving people opportunities based on their skill set. And you are in luck. We have an immediate opening in the custodial department." I pointed to the paper. "The previous sanitation engineer was promoted to chairman of the board, so his position is vacant. The pay is $35,000 a year. You will be scrubbing the same floors you walked on in your high heels. You will clean the same toilets your father used. It comes with a blue polyester uniform." I turned my back on her, walking toward the door. "If you need money, Natalie, fill out the application. HR is on the second floor. Do not be late for your shift. The trash is piling up." The walk from the boardroom to the elevator was the longest walk of my life, not because of the distance, but because of the weight I was leaving behind. The hallway was lined with employees who had spilled out of their cubicles, drawn by the commotion of the police raid. These were people who had looked through me for years, acting as if I were invisible as I emptied their trash bins. Now they pressed themselves against the walls, giving me a wide berth, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. They whispered as I passed. They knew. The word had traveled fast. The janitor was the king. I did not look at them. I did not gloat. I simply walked with the steady rhythm of a man who had nothing left to prove. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The descent was smooth and silent, a stark contrast to the chaos upstairs. As the numbers counted down, I checked my reflection in the polished steel doors. The man staring back was calm. The anger that had fueled me for days was gone, burned away by the fire of the confrontation. All that remained was a cold, clean sense of closure. The doors slid open, revealing the cavernous marble lobby of the Harrington Tower. It was a scene of confusion. Uniformed officers were securing the exits, and news crews were already gathering outside their cameras, pointed at the glass doors like vultures waiting for a carcass. But my eyes were drawn to a single figure in the center of the room. Natalie was sitting on the floor near the security turnstiles. She had been escorted out of the executive suite, but in the confusion, she had been left drift. She sat with her legs pulled up to her chest, her expensive cream dress stained with dirt from the floor. She was rocking back and forth, weeping openly, oblivious to the stares of the security guards and the receptionists. She looked small. She looked broken. She looked exactly like she had made me feel for 3 years. She looked up as I approached. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face a ruin of smeared makeup. She started to scramble to her feet, her hand reaching out toward me. "Jack." She choked out a desperate, rasping sound. "Jack, please wait." I did not break my stride. I did not slow down. I looked at her through the glass partition of the turnstile, the way one looks at a museum exhibit of a tragedy from a long time ago. I walked past her, pushing through the revolving doors and stepping out into the cool air of the city. The Rolls-Royce was waiting at the curb, a black island of safety in the madness. The driver opened the rear door, and I slid into the sanctuary of the leather interior. The door closed with a solid, heavy thud, shutting out the noise of the sirens and the shouting reporters. I pressed the button on the armrest, and the window slid down just an inch. I looked back at the building one last time. Through the glass facade, I could still see her. Natalie had collapsed back onto the floor, her head buried in her hands, weeping for a life she had destroyed with her own greed. She was just a silhouette now, a ghost haunting a building that no longer belonged to her family. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Elias Blackwood. He answered on the first ring, his voice efficient and ready. "We are securing the assets," Sir Blackwood said. "The transition team is ready to move in. We can have the new management structure in place by Monday." I watched the building looming over me, a monument to arrogance and lies. I thought about keeping it. I thought about running it. But then I realized that every brick, every window, every inch of that place was infected with their memory. "No Blackwood." I said, my voice low and final. "Change of plans." I do not want to run this company." There was a pause on the line. Sir Blackwood asked, "It is a profitable entity. We possess 51%. "Sell it," I commanded. "Strip it down. Sell the assets. Sell the warehouses. Sell the fleet. Sell the intellectual property to the competitors. Break it into pieces and scatter them to the wind. I want the name Harrington erased from the corporate registry. I do not want a trace of them left in this city." "Understood," Sir Blackwood said without missing a beat. "Scorched earth. I will begin the liquidation process immediately." "And Blackwood," I added, leaning back into the seat, "get me a flight to Tokyo. I am done with Detroit. It is time to build something new, somewhere clean. Consider it done." I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the seat beside me. I tapped the partition, and the driver nodded, pulling the car away from the curb. The Rolls-Royce glided into the traffic, moving effortlessly away from the scene of the crime. I watched the Harrington Tower shrink in the side mirror, getting smaller and smaller, until it was just a gray smudge against the skyline. Then we turned a corner, and it was gone. The screen of my life faded to black, leaving me in the dark, but for the first time in years, I could see the stars. The end. The fall of the Harrington Empire serves as a powerful reminder that true worth is never defined by a uniform or a bank account. Natalie and her family were blinded by arrogance, mistaking kindness for weakness and silence for stupidity. They chased the illusion of status while discarding the reality of loyalty, only to find themselves bankrupt in both wealth and spirit. In the end, the story proves that integrity is the ultimate currency. We must learn to treat every person with respect regardless of their station, because the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. If you enjoyed watching Jack deliver the ultimate justice, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of betrayal and redemption.